Bitch, where's my money? If you want to help me out, you can subscribe to me on Patreon, which is Grimachu, on Subscribestar, which is Grim-Jim, or if you want to make a one-off donation to help support me and keep the channel going, you can do so at paypal.me/JDesborough. Thanks. As statements go, you would think that the statement 2 + 2 = 4 would be as close to universal as you can get, and yet this has become a matter of some contention online, with people offering various ways in which 2 + 2 does not equal 4. And most people, this creates a reaction of consternation and indignation at how stupid it all is. But that's because I think the two sets of people having two different sets of argument, which are quite revealing, and also act to reveal what's going on in some other contexts around the use of language and so on. But with 2 + 2 apparently no longer necessarily equaling 4, it seems I'm going to have to retire one of my favourite ever Blackadder clips.
This is called adding. If I have 2 beans, and then I add 2 more beans, what do I have?
Some beans.
Yes and no.
The problem is not dissimilar to the problem between Blackadder and Baldric in this clip. Blackadder is trying to explain mathematics on a conceptual level, a sort of platonic ideal of numbers, whereas Baldric is, for all that he is stupid, and I don't necessarily think the people on the other side of this argument are stupid, but for all he's stupid, he cannot remove beans from existing within the paradigm of food, him being an uneducated peasant who works in the kitchen. So for him, beans is paramount over the numbers, and he's not very good at wrestling with numbers. This is elevated to a comedic degree, obviously, but this does illustrate the problem. One half is having an argument over the platonic ideal of numbers existing independent of our symbology, syntax, language, and semantics, and the other is having an argument about symbols and semantics and so on.
Let's try again, shall we? I have 2 beans, then I add 2 more beans. What does that make?
A very small casserole.
Is there any power to that semantic argument? I would say to an extent, yes. I'm constantly arguing that semantics are important, because if we don't have a common understanding of what something means, then we cannot meaningfully communicate, and this becomes a problem, certainly in this case in mathematics, because people are talking past each other, but it's much more of a problem in the social sphere when we don't agree on the definition of racism or sexism or prejudice, or where we use loaded terms to describe phenomena that don't fit into that. So when people talk about systemic racism, they don't actually mean that anybody involved has to actually be racist, just that the system has disparate impact on different people. But by invoking the word racism, you garner a certain amount of power. Nobody, bar a handful of people, want to be associated with racism, so they don't want systemic racism to exist. So they're willing to swallow a lot of other things, expend a lot of money and effort and so on, pursuing something that isn't really there. The way in which systems impact people in different ways is a problem, one we should probably address and look at, but it's not being named accurately, and that creates its own problems.
Baldric, the ape creatures of the Indus have mastered this. Now try again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So how many are there?
3.
What?
And that one.
3 and that one.
For sake of ease, if not accuracy, you could call this an objective versus a subjective argument, or you could call it postmodernism, though that term tends to get thrown around and abused in ways that perhaps it shouldn't. But the argument from the non-mathematical side tends to be this semantic argument, this symbolic argument, and it's rooted in this idea that by changing language, by changing information, in the way that it's represented, not the information itself, that we can change the world, that everything is subjective, that perception is all. It's a very solipsistic way to consider the universe. Whereas normally in science and mathematics, you're working on an objective basis. So we agree on a very narrow definition of what these symbols and terms mean within that arena. So saying that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not negated by you saying that, oh, well, no, in other languages it equals ci, or su, or quattro, or quattra, or via, or nelia. It doesn't matter, right? Because all of those terms convey the exact same meaning. 4 beans.
So if I add that one to the 3, what will I have?
Oh, some beans.
The other way people try to get around this, to say that 2 plus 2 can equal 5, or anything other than 4, is to change the base in which we're counting. So the counting that you're familiar with is base 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? In binary, it would be 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, and so on, right? So under that base, the symbols that we use to mean 2 and 4, or 5, for example, are rendered differently. But they still convey the same meaning, and you're categorizing it when you say counting in base whatever. It doesn't change the universal truth that 2 beans plus 2 beans is 4 beans. Another way around it is to introduce some rules, so that if we say we round down the numbers, then 2.6 or 2 plus 2.6 or 2 doesn't equal 4, because the 0.6s are enough to take it over to make it 5. So in that instance, 2 plus 2 equals 5. But you've introduced the rules, and you've explained them. We're rounding down the numbers, but not until after we've calculated. Yeah, these are all valid in and of their own selves, but they don't actually argue the same point at all, and you're introducing something different. So what does it equal in Chinese, in Japanese, in French, in German? What does it equal if we use these counting rules or this counting base? You know, does it still equal 5? Well, yeah, it still equals what we mean by 4, right? Not 5. It still equals the same thing. 2 beans plus 2 beans remains 4 beans. However you describe it, whatever language you use to express it, it still means the same thing. It's universally true.
Yes. To you, Baldric, the Renaissance was just something that happened to other people, wasn't it?
Another line of argument might be, but what about people who have no concept of numbers? The idea of 0 wasn't understood truly in mathematical terms for quite some time. It was an invention of the ancient Indian peoples, allegedly. And there are remote tribes today that don't have or haven't had real concepts of mathematics. The Piraha in the Amazon, for example, were a completely anumeric tribe. They had no real concept of numbers, and as a result, they couldn't really grapple with anything higher than 1 to 3. Though if you showed them 2 beans and you showed them 4 beans, I'm sure they could pick out which of the 2 piles were the biggest. But in researching this, researchers introduced terms that meant numerals to the Piraha. So unfortunately we've lost that as a natural experiment, but they rapidly picked up on the idea of numbers and began to apply them and began to understand basic addition and subtraction and so on. So the concept is still there, and it's still a universal. They can still recognize that 4 beans is bigger than 2 beans, even if they don't necessarily have the language to express it. For a less contentious non-real world example, orcs in Warhammer can only count to 5. So they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lots, ords, loads, That's as high as they can really conceptually count, because all their technical ability is sort of innate and mildly psychic. That's how it all works. They don't understand mathematics beyond an extremely basic level. But that still doesn't mean that these things don't apply, that they don't exist universally. An orc could tell the difference between 2 gobbers and 4 gobbers. How many teeth they're owed from making a transaction. They can tell that one thing is bigger than another, that if you take some away you have less, that if you add some you have more. So even on an abstract basis, people can understand numbers, and they remain universally true in the same way that gravity remains universally true, no matter what you say or what you think the cause of it is. It remains the same force universally. Gears work the same whether you're an ignorant tribesman or an engineer. You don't have to understand it necessarily for it to work. It does work, and the reasons why it works, the observations on why it works, remain universal at a platonic level.
What do you think of Percy's rough, Baldock?
4.
What?
Some beans and some beans is 4 beans.
No, we've moved on from advanced mathematics. We're on to elementary dressmaking. What do you think of Percy's rough?
The last arena in which I've seen attempts to muddy the waters going on is in meaning. Now we're, strictly speaking, in terms of mathematics, where 2 beans plus 2 beans is 4 beans, right? The beans are just a stand-in, something to help you visualize. It's not about the beans. What do you know about the beans? But they'll say that numbers have different associations in different cultures. The easiest one for people to acknowledge is probably that the number 13 is considered unlucky in primarily Western Anglo and Christian culture. Why? 13 guests at Jesus' Last Supper, various other reasons. It's been considered an unlucky number for quite a long time, and actually across several cultures, but never mind, let's not muddy my own waters. So when we come across the number 13, there are those associations with it. Okay, but so what? That doesn't change the numerical meaning of 13. If some other culture considers some other number lucky or unlucky, it might change how much they're willing to spend on a special license plate or a particular model of car, but it doesn't make any difference to the mathematical meaning of the number. It just makes no difference to that. And if you're arguing semantics, symbolism, associations, anything other than this universal platonic number, you're missing the point. It doesn't matter. 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's all there is to it.
What do you think? Try to have a thought of your own, Baldock. Thinking is so important. What do you think?
I think thinking is so important, my lord.
I give up.
By and large, this hoopla is meaningless. It's something to point and laugh at, but it doesn't really have any real-world effect, at least until some brilliant postmodern thinker goes to try and design an engine or build a bridge. Then I would suggest you ford the river somewhere else. But it does mean something when you're trying to socially engineer, when you're manipulating terms, misusing terms, redefining terms, making it so that there is no solid ground, nothing upon which people can agree. If you mean something entirely different than what I understand from the term racism and you employ it, then we're not communicating effectively. You're not successfully arguing for a point, you're trying to bamboozle people. Same for other isms. If we bandy these terms about, if we use their emotional impact and we don't consider the platonic universal reality behind these things, if we don't even acknowledge reality or even try to seek reality, if we start from a point of bias, if we don lenses before we look at anything, you're just inviting yourself to make mistakes. And just as with the bridge or the engine, if you're not operating on these universal principles rooted in reality, then the end result is much less likely to work. And that's where the real argument is, but 2 plus 2 equals 4, and the dissenters to that do provide a blindingly obvious example of exactly where the disconnect is and where the danger lies. It's been called misogynistic, racist, a hate group, reactionary. It's been blamed for Trump, for keeping women out of games and technology. None of this is true. If you want the real story, then you need to buy Inside Gamergate.